This hearing to order, and I want to thank all of you for being here. I apologize for the delay. We had another meeting that ran over a few minutes, but I wanted to convene this hearing 1 week before the official start of the 2016 hurricane season. And as the hearing title suggests, we'll be focusing on improvements in forecasting, and we'll discuss how track and intensity forecasts can be further enhanced. 90 years ago, Florida was hit by a Category 4 storm. It was later named the Great Miami Hurricane, but it not only devastated Miami, but crossed the Gulf of Mexico, inflicting damage to Pensacola Bay. This was a time with little meteorological data or capabilities, and thus alerts to Floridians came too late. The National Hurricane Center reports that Coconut Grove experienced a 15-foot storm surge, and people mistakenly left their homes as the storm's calm eye centered overhead. It is unclear how many people perished, as the Red Cross estimates 373 souls lost their lives, but the count cannot be certain, as more than 800 people were missing. Although my home state of Florida has not seen a hurricane make landfall in almost 11 years, we must never sit idle and succumb to hurricane amnesia. Innovation is the key to ensuring lives and property are spared by accurate forecasting. This hurricane season, there are two new tools which will be at the disposal of our researchers and forecasters. The first is called the Coyote. It is a small unmanned aerial system deployed directly from the P-3 Hurricane Hunters. This drone is able to fly into weather conditions that are otherwise impossible for manned aircraft, while capturing atmospheric observations and relaying that data in real time to the Hurricane Center. While this technology has been in testing since 2014, I hope it will be fully utilized in upcoming storms. The second involves tools for storm surge, which is critically important as water is responsible for 90% of the deaths associated with storms. The storm surge watch and warning graphic, while still in the experimental phase, will provide watches and warnings to coastal residents, similar to those issued for tropical storms or hurricanes, but will focus solely on the risks associated with high waters. In response to these risks, it will issue guidance for evacuations in the areas impacted. The potential storm surge flooding map, which began testing during 2014, will finally become operational this season. This map will highlight areas where storm surge could inundate areas and estimate the height at which waters could reach. One only needs to look at Hurricane Katrina to realize how devastating storm surge can be. And not heeding storm surge warnings could be the difference between life and death. I applaud the National Hurricane Center for its work on this new tool, and I stress the importance of educating people on the dangers of storm surge. The need for timely and accurate forecasts cannot be overstated. Indeed, advancements in forecasting have made great strides as technology and research have intersected. As our witness notes in his written testimony, the National Hurricane Center's 5-day track forecast is about as accurate as the 3-day forecast was just 20 years ago. This improvement in modeling not only allows more notice for evacuations, which will help especially in the Florida Keys, but appropriately provides for a proper planning and damage mitigation to be conducted prior to a storm. Also, increased confidence in the Center's track and intensity forecast will lead to the public's trust in heeding those warnings. Last year, along with my colleague Senator Nelson, I introduced a Hurricane Forecast Improvement Act. This bill would require NOAA to improve guidance for hurricane track, intensity, and storm surge forecasts. It is modeled after NOAA's Hurricane Forecast Improvement Project, which has laid the groundwork for coordinating and improving research. This program has a worthy goal of reducing errors in storm tracking, and with continued research, it is my hope a reduction in the loss of life, injury, and economic harm will result. Now is the time to continue the momentum for research and technology to drive our forecasters to better track storms, not cut millions of dollars from the project as the administration's fiscal year 2017 budget suggests. I had hoped my legislation, which was adopted into Chairman Thune's larger weather bill, would have made it to the President's desk by now, but unfortunately it has been tied up due to unrelated issues. Nonetheless, I will continue to push for its passage and support the Center's work for better forecasting. I must note that Senator Nelson has been a good partner in these efforts. I know he'll be here in a few moments to speak to us as well, and I look forward to continuing that partnership so that this does indeed get signed into law. In closing, Floridians will always remember the year 1992 as the year Hurricane Andrew changed the landscape of our state forever. Noted as the third strongest hurricane to hit the United States, Andrew produced a 17-foot storm surge, was responsible for 23 deaths, and caused $26.5 billion in damage. For the terrible destruction the storm inflicted on Florida, it also shed light on the need to be prepared. Last week, our nation recognized Hurricane Preparedness Week. Our witness, Dr. Nab, took part in many activities throughout the Gulf Coast to increase awareness. Education, coupled with strong support from state and local partnerships, is the key to ensuring families have a hurricane plan in place. At the end of the day, the most important function of storm forecasting is indeed to protect the lives of those who we love. Floridians are incredibly resilient, but as we enter this year's hurricane season, which I hope will not be active, I urge everyone to assess their risk, develop a plan, and be prepared. On a side note, 2 weeks ago, I visited the National Hurricane Center in Miami, and I saw firsthand the good work that is being done on this front. And again, I thank Dr. Nab for appearing before us today, and now I recognize Ranking Member Booker for his opening statement. Dr. Nab, let me touch a couple points. Let me just say that there's obviously a lot of negativity today about government, politics, things going on in our country, but our men and women who serve us in public service in various different fields do an excellent job on our behalf, and one of those places is the National Hurricane Center. I had a chance to visit there. I visited there previously, once as a state legislator and now again as a U.S. Senator. I'm just so incredibly impressed with the work all of you do, and we want to thank you, the level of expertise and the resource you provide, as was pointed out to me, and which I understood before as well. It's not just to the men and women of the United States, but so many liaison partners around the world that don't have a National Hurricane Center of their own rely on our expertise as well. And so that service you also provide to so many partner nations who have come to rely on the United States as the authority on these issues. And by the way, almost as if on cue, and no one can accuse me of having anything to do with this, but already I see there's a special tropical weather outlook report. There's a system developing in the Western Atlantic. Development is not anticipated for the next couple of days, but environmental conditions are expected to become more conducive for tropical or subtropical development on Friday. So just a reminder that even as we're meeting here today, everything's starting up, and hurricane season is a date on the calendar, but a reminder to everyone that you can have storms before that day. We've had storms, I believe we had one last year after that date, or close to the end of the season, late in the season. So it doesn't matter when it is, it's a real issue. You talked in your opening statement about I talked in the opening statement about the legislation that Senator Nelson and I have worked on. We introduced it last year that would require NOAA to improve guidance for hurricane track, intensity, storm surge forecasts. It builds on important work that's already been deployed, which is the Hurricane Forecast Improvement Project. But it's not yet been congressionally authorized, and now the President's budget is recommending a cut of $3 million. So without asking you to opine I'm not asking you to opine on the congressional process or on the budget recommendation, but I am asking you to speak a little bit about how valuable this project is, the Forecast Improvement Project, and how forecasting would be impacted should a future administration or what have you further cut or worse, absent any legislation, and the program entirely.
Sure. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson, for your support of the National Hurricane Program and what we do with our partners. That support is very much appreciated. And it is obvious from what we have already accomplished through the Hurricane Forecast Improvement Project that investments in advanced modeling capabilities pay off. And they're already paying off. And the good news is that HFIP is not going away. It is going on. And again, we have been able to improve our hurricane weather research and forecast model, the HWRF. And again, during the past 3 hurricane seasons combined, it has remarkably become our best performing intensity model. That is a tremendous accomplishment. And because we've been able to make some improvements so far in meeting these 5-year goals with HFIP, there is promise for continued improvements given a proper level of investment. And again, those areas of investment have to be multifaceted and include the data you need from inside the hurricane and the environment, scientific advancements, including from data like the Coyote and other platforms to increase our understanding of the hurricanes, models that can use those data and the supercomputer power to run those more advanced models, and importantly, to have the staff that we need in order to do the development work and leverage the improvements that come from these scientific advances. And the faster we can hire our vacancies, the better off we're going to be, and that has been a challenge recently. So all of those things require investments to move forward. It is always the case, and is the case heading into this hurricane season, that the National Hurricane Center is fully prepared to carry out its operational mission, but we always have more difficulty in applying and having the resources to apply to advance our product and our warning suite, and to have the research resources, mainly in terms of people, to enhance the computer forecast models that has been happening during HFIP.
You also, in your testimony, talked about the next evolution of the geostationary operational environmental satellite, which is set to be launched from Cape Canaveral, I believe, later this year. And this satellite is going to provide high-resolution images of storms and, up to the minute, every minute, and as a result, more accurate tracking and intensity forecasts. Once that satellite is launched, do you have an estimate as to how long it will take to come online and begin providing this data?
Yes, I'll also say before I directly answer that the National Hurricane Center has already been preparing itself, as have other components of the National Weather Service, to get ready for these new data by participating in what's called the GOES-R Proving Ground. Some of our forecasters have already directly had their hands on the operations floor on some proxy data sets that prepare us for what GOES-R is going to be providing. And we've also installed in our backyard at the Hurricane Center, as you saw when you visited, the 3 dishes getting ready to bring down the GOES-R data. And once those data start flowing, after the satellite is launched, my understanding is that it could take up to about a year for calibration, validation, and checkout to occur. But that means that perhaps in some point during the 2017 hurricane season, calibrated, validated data from GOES-R could be flowing. And we've tried to also prepare our computing infrastructure for that, because we're going to have 3 times as many channels on the satellite, 4 times as much spatial resolution, and 5 times as much temporal resolution in the data. So tremendous advances are coming. We're very excited about what's ahead.
In my statement, as I was opening up the hearing, I talked a little bit about hurricane amnesia and the ability to forget over time about what this is like. I do recall 2004 and 2005 living in South Florida. We experienced storms, if I'm correct, I believe. Katrina was in September, and there was one again a month later. So we lost power, we saw trees, and not the extensive damage of Andrew, but obviously in Florida. Katrina went on to do extensive damage in the Gulf Coast and in Louisiana and Mississippi. But time passes and people forget. So you've been on the road now for the better part of last week, traveling the Gulf Coast, primarily in Florida, talking to people about what they needed to be doing to get ready. What's your assessment? How aware are people that hurricane season is upon us? How prepared are they? And what's your sense of the standing today among the public about the upcoming season?
I'm still very concerned that way too many people in the public in Florida and in other states are not as prepared as they need to be. One of the concerns is that not only has it been more than a decade since the last Florida hurricane, but in that time frame, we've gained something like 3 million new residents in the state of Florida. Other metropolitan areas are similar. Just visited Houston, Texas last week. Since Hurricane Ike struck there in 2008, they have something like 1 million new residents in their metropolitan area. So not only do you have people who might have been through a hurricane in the past and maybe they've gotten out of the habit of preparing, or maybe they experienced the fringes of a hurricane in the past and they really haven't been through the core of a major hurricane, or maybe they're new to the problem and they've never prepared for a hurricane at all. I think there's way too many of those people still out there, which is why last week during the Hurricane Awareness Tour, which was merged with the presidentially declared National Hurricane Preparedness Week, the themes each day focused on things that people, residents of our states, need to be doing to get ready for the next hurricane. That's why we focused on planning your evacuation route and destination in advance, buying your supplies in advance, updating your insurance now because of those 30-day waiting periods for flood insurance, for example, and doing whatever you can today to strengthen your home. And again, by telling people that I'm doing those things personally, hopefully we're reaching people a little bit more on an emotional level so that they realize that all of us share in this problem. And I welcome anyone who's willing to go out there and share what they do to get ready for the next hurricane, to set an example for what the public can be doing.
One of the things we discussed, and I'd heard this discussed previously, is that one of the most devastating potential storms would be one that went right into the Tampa Bay area, right into the bay. I saw some models of what that would look like, rough models. But in essence, I think this is important. This is an area that hasn't had that event happen, at least not in modern times. What could you describe briefly for people living in the Tampa Bay area what that storm situation would look like, and what level of intensity would require for the worst case scenario? And I was particularly impressed, I should say, and impacted by some of the flooding and storm surge projections where there were communities, not necessarily on the water, that could see extensive amounts of flooding as a result of a storm of that magnitude. If you could briefly take this moment to you were talking to people in the Tampa Bay area, what would that event look like for them and this sort of worst case scenario, which unfortunately one day will happen just by a matter of statistics?
Yes, Senator, it certainly is a matter of when, not if, and Tampa Bay area is one of those many areas that I am very, very concerned about. They last experienced the direct hit of a major hurricane back in October of 1921. So nearly a century later, there are a lot more people and a lot more infrastructure in harm's way there. And it is important for people to realize there that the storm surge flooding risk in many portions of the Tampa Bay area goes not just across the street from the beachfront property, not just blocks inland, but in some locations miles inland from the coast. So it's vital that people, even if you can't see the water from where you are at your home, find out today if you live in a hurricane storm surge evacuation zone, and figure out today where you would go and how you would get there if told to evacuate. And for folks who live far enough inland, in whatever part of Florida or any other hurricane-prone states, if you're not in one of those storm surge zones, find someone you care about who is and plan now to be their inland evacuation destination. But again, that storm surge hazard in the Tampa Bay area, like in many other areas, goes miles inland. And that's why it's even more important that we are going operational this year with our potential storm surge flooding map. Because if people haven't gotten it by that time, then when that product comes out, if a hurricane is threatening that area, then we will be showing people just how far inland from the immediate coastline the storm surge flooding could go in that scenario.
How could someone, whether it's in the Tampa Bay area or anywhere else, see whether their home is in that? Where would they go? Where's the resource they can go to see whether their property or where they're living is located in that zone?
Right. The best advice is to contact your local emergency management agency in your county, your city. And in the state of Florida, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting information from them about what evacuation zone, if any, that you live in. Your local emergency managers have prescribed those evacuation zones in large part based on guidance from the Hurricane Center on who's vulnerable to storm surge. So when they prescribe those evacuation zones, they're doing it for good reason. And when they call for evacuations and tell people to evacuate, it's so vital that they go, because they'll do that based on advice from the National Weather Service on who is vulnerable to storm surge in that situation.
And to that I would just add, oftentimes, this is anecdotal, but I've heard from people that live in the 6th floor of a building, and their argument is, well, there's not going to be water on the 6th floor, and that's not really the point. The point is, if you live on the 6th floor but the street is heavily flooded, you can't get out, nothing can get in, and if, God forbid, you have a medical emergency, responders can't get there either. So people need to understand that being in the zone, doesn't matter if you're on the 10th floor of a big building, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to get out for days to come in a worst-case scenario such as the one you've described.